Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We are going to do a little bit more debug code today because we did a bit of it yesterday and we have a little bit more of it to do. I believe what we wanted to do was to make it so that we could edit some debug values, which I think we already kind of have the structure for that in place in the actual debug system itself. So it's really just a case of going through and cleaning out some stuff and doing some wiring. I don't know that we have a whole lot of new code that has to be written to make that happen. So that's what I'm doing. And today is day 248, so if you're someone who pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org and you want to follow along with the source code, you want to start with day 247 source code, because day 247 source code is what the code base that I am starting with today. So when you see me like load files and stuff, that's what I am loading out of. All right, so let's go ahead and launch forward here and get ourselves into position, get ourselves into compromising position. Let's see, we got our PRJ file, and we are building. There we go. So if you recall from yesterday, we left it with us being able to output debug data, but we hadn't really done much beyond that, right? So we have, of course, really long startup times now, which is really unfortunate. Our startup times, OpenGL on this platform takes a long time to start up, which is kind of which is too bad. Not sure there's much we can do about that. Although we could, since we don't really know what our final needs are going to be in terms of texture downloads, it could be that we can create less context, which would help, because that's the slow part. So here, if we take a look at the platform stuff, you can see that we actually have the stuff that we wanted to edit, which is inside this platform drop down here. You can see we've got like this block that we output, and we never really did anything for prettily printing blocks or anything, but we are outputting the values that we had, and what we want to be able to do is like click on these values, right? We want to be able to click on these values and have them toggle. And so I need to go into the code and figure out how to make sure that that works. Basically, like I said, this is going to be mostly just archaeology, because I think we already pretty much have the code for doing this. It already exists inside our system. All right. So let's take a look. Because I think mostly, like I said, this is going to be a plumbing exercise. It might be extensive plumbing exercise. Like I said, we're trying to finish up that debug system, so we kind of have to have our work cut out for us, because there's a bunch of stuff in there, and it doesn't quite do yet what we want it to do. So here's the debug interface, and what we're doing right now is the way the debug system works entirely, for better or for worse, is every time a debug call gets made, it essentially goes into a giant buffer. So it's just like kind of a rolling log of information. And you can kind of see here that we can output a bunch of different pieces of data, and they sort of store a type with them that says what the data actually is. So at any time when we do this, we get sort of a rolling event log that has that piece of data in it. But what you will notice is that that data is copied into the event log by value. So you can see that it no longer, it doesn't actually remember where that thing is, right? It doesn't know if it was going to edit it. It doesn't have any idea necessarily how to like get that value back. And so what we need to do, and that's not necessarily a bad idea, right? There's two ways to sort of do debug systems like this. One is to snap a pointer to the thing, and that's a little bit easier to do. And so, for example, in here, let me look at the Win32 file where this is actually happening. Win32 handmade.cpp. If I was to go to debug value, so you can see what's going on here. Every time through this loop, we are going to issue one of these debug value commands, once for global pause and once for global rendering type. Now, the important thing to note here is that we are not storing the pointers of those. We're only like pushing their values into the debug stream, which means it's trivial for us to print out what they are, but we can't actually ever modify them, right? Now, like I was saying, one way to make a debug system is to actually use the pointer here. So when we call this, we actually record the pointer so that when we want to edit it, we just go back in there and write it. The reason why we're not going to do that is because if we were to do that, it would mean that we could not ever output debug values that were transient. Because once we snap the pointer, that means that we have to leave that memory around till after the debug system's done with it. And our debug system right now is set up to record frames basically forever. And so we don't want to have to deal with a situation where we could be generating tons of debug data and all of a sudden all this memory that was associated, like, entity structs or something that we would have liked to get rid of and not keep around, suddenly have to sit around until the debug system's done with them, which could be never, right? We got a lot of memory in this machine, but we don't necessarily have that much. So we don't want to just keep generating things ad infinitum. So what we'd like to do is only store the parts we actually want, which in this case is just maybe an int or whatever like this. So we don't necessarily want to snap a pointer and have to make sure that like whole memory blocks or pieces of things are retained. Now, what that means is that we need some other mechanism. If we're not going to go the pointer route, we need some other mechanism of doing the editing. And we kind of built in a mechanism exactly like that, which was this debug ID thing. So this debug ID thing was a way of saying, hey, I'm going to tell you that there's this kind of permanent identifier you can use to know when I'm talking about a specific block, so that later when I come back round, when I do these debug values, if you have done edits to them, I could pick up those edits now, right? And so we kind of already put ourselves in a position we set ourselves up for success, as I sometimes like to say. We are in a position to do that now because we have a coherent explanation of how that might work. But it's not trivial, but we have a coherent explanation. And so if I remember correctly, we had something where we could get data out of this thing. And this is why I say it's going to be archaeology, because I just don't remember everything about how that actually works. But I believe we had something like that. I don't know that it was actually exposed here in the interface. So it might have to be pulled out a little bit more, but we'll take a look. So here's where these things sort of get set up. Debug initialize value is no longer a relevant thing, I don't believe. We don't actually ever use that anymore, if I'm not mistaken. And you know what? We don't need this stuff anymore either, right? These things are, get rid of that. So debug initialize value, I think we can also get rid of that guy. So I'm gonna prune this stuff first because I don't think this stuff is relevant anymore. So let's see here, debug initialize value. That was for if we wanted this to define the values itself, right? So we can get rid of that, no longer necessary. So what we need to do is we need that function that looks things up. And like I said, I don't see it there, so I'm going to take a look and see if it's if we still have it. I think we might, but we'll find out. So here we go. We've got our debug code. I'm just scanning through it to look to see if I can see it. We don't need write handmade config anymore because we decided that that's not going to happen, right? So this guy can go as well. He can be eliminated. Oops. We've got this. I need to work on my editing commands. It's something that I really need to do. I need to upgrade like how my edit commands work now that I do this modal thing, because it means that there's a bunch of things that I do that are stupid. Like what you want it to do is you always want it to clean up the white space for you. Like I have a specific way my code is always set up. And so for example, in this circumstance, if I was going to do something, like I'm going to paste something in here, like I'm going to paste something, I'm trying to think of what the right example is. But if I'm going to paste something, I always want a space after the comma. And so I get in these situations where I'm in the mode and I do the paste operation. Probably that was a bad idea. Like let's say I grab this, I do the paste operation, and now it's really hard for me to fix up the spacing for no reason. Like all I should really have to do is do that and everything should be fine because I just need the syntax. But unfortunately, I have to do like a bunch of stuff here where I do this and then switch back to this mode and then switch into this mode to hit the space, right? And so I feel like if I just made some smart stuff, it could be a lot easier. But that's neither here nor there. That's just notes. Now that I have 4Coder and I can program it in C, there's all these things that am interested in going to do because I could never program eList well enough, I don't think, to do a lot of the stuff I would have wanted to do. But C, I could make some pretty good stuff. So it's kind of on the table. Thank you, Alan, for that. Anyway, so here we are again in the debug code. And I'm just looking to see because I thought we had some stuff that could do those lookups for us or something similar to that. So here is an example right here. Getter create debug view for. And you can see that, it's passing a debug ID, and it's looking to hash that value, right? And when it hashes that value, it creates this debug view thing. And the debug view is, one of those like those drop-down things. It stores that state. So what that means is that we already have a way of saying, oh, there's a way to like look up the debug view for whatever this ID happened to be. So that's thing number one. And we'll sort of look at that in a second here. And then I think once we're in there, there should be a way too to like sort of get things by hierarchical name, because we're sorting those things into a hierarchy. That kind of has to work, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be able to do that. So we know that that also is there. Okay, so here's an example, right? Here's a variable group thing that creates variable groups by name, and it can create things. It can sort of access things with names and stuff like that. So we've got two sort of things here, but that one is really more. That one's really more, I think, for. I think that we sort of had these as two separate systems, right? One was for creating sort of a hierarchical menu of stuff, and one was for doing the output in the other way. And so I kind of want to smush them down, right? I want to smush them into one. And so I think what I might want to do is just sort of, again, like, what I might want to do here is say, okay, if I do this debug begin data block bit, and then I do this stuff here, where I've got the debug pointer ID thing here. What I want to do, I think, is sort of take this code that used to be sort of a separate system and sort of make this code work inside these data blocks. So basically, the application is responsible for being able to produce some sort of an identifier that can tell you that you're inside a data block. And then in there, everything else is just sort of done by name inside the data block. So it can like go and do lookups there, and it could find out like what the latest state would be for that thing or stuff like that. I think that's where I want to go with this, because like I said, I kind of want this to sort of collapse down to something a little bit more manageable. And it was just a little too sprawling before for our purposes, and a little bit, like I said, I like doing code by exploration, which means you take some time to go figure out, to play with some things and see what happens. But at the end, you don't want to just like leave it that way. You want to, start condensing it and figuring out what you actually needed and then make that stuff work well. Otherwise, you just end up with this giant sprawl that, is tons of code you maybe don't want, or that isn't working particularly efficiently, or who knows what else. So I think that's where I'd like to go with this. And I think that's a reasonable way to approach this problem, potentially. What I want to look at first, before I make that decision, though, is we are using, in some other places, we are using debug values in some slightly different ways. We are doing like ifs on those values. So for example, inside the renderer, I guess, we are using some things like, like global renderer show lighting samples. So the way we're doing those right now is we're just placing them as globals. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, though. So I think what we would do is we'd just have a place where there was a data block that output those things, and off you go. So the only thing that makes me a little bit nervous about this, right, is the dynamic code reloading. Like normally, if we just want to create some kind of an ID here, it's pretty trivial. In fact, we could just use a counter variable and the file and line, we could just use the file and a counter, and that could be sufficient to create our debug ID, right? Because it's a unique place in the code. So we would have the ability to create ones that were based on locations in the code, as well as ones that weren't. The problem is when we do dynamic code reloading, those things will move potentially, right? So we're in the middle of the running game, we reload the code, and we really need like some kind of a GUID, right? We need something here that's like a GUID that we can actually hold on to. And I'll be honest, as I'm saying that right now, I'm kind of wondering if we would just use a GUID, because we could just generate a random 64-bit value and that would work. You know, I hadn't really considered that before. I had not really considered that before. But that would totally be fine. For example, and I have, like, this is a very strange thing, but I'm just going to point it out. So for example, if we just took this table and every time we wanted a new one of these, we just grabbed the, one of these guys out of here, that would be that. I've never thought of doing that before. I'm not sure why. Because then if you just throw that in to that line of code and you just always, as that piece of code moves around, it's always uniquely identified. What a strange idea. I'm not sure how I feel about that. It doesn't seem like it's that different from maintaining an H file where you would just put the GUIDs like we were doing before. And it's certainly not as good as some kind of thing where we would metacode where we could just know that they would all be extracted and matched by name in some way. Well, to be honest, I guess now that I think about it, I don't think that's really necessary. Because now that I think about it, that may be going a little bit overboard. Because really, since we know that we want these things to be displayed to the user, they would need unique names. Which means that when we call begin data block, whatever this string is here, that could actually be used as the ID if we wanted to, right? So we could choose to just hash that string, which is something that we sort of were talking about doing before. So since this is not a performance thing, this is not performance critical, this is not something that's used in, this is used to output debug values, this is not used in like inside a loop or something weird like that where we would care about the timing. I guess probably what I would say is the most logical thing to do is just to actually hash the string there, because we know that string is essentially also going to be unique. So that seems like an interesting idea. I think that's what I would like to try. So basically that would involve, and I think we already do a little bit of that, right? Let's see. So it looks like we have a GUID that's unique file counter string, and unique file counter string is uniquifying this thing based on its location. And I don't know that we really care about that too much, right? Like I said before, that's not particularly useful. So So yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to think this through to see exactly what I want, because it's an interesting decision. So I think what I specifically want there is when I do a begin data block, if I have this ID, and you can see that I do the record debug event and I put the ID in there, if I perhaps do not supply an ID, so there is no actual ID given to this thing, whatever it is, then that to me suggests that I could just leave off the ID and it would use the string. So in cases where I'm not trying to associate this with some actual data that I have that's real, that seems like a reasonable way to go. I don't know. So that seems reasonable to me. Now, this one in particular doesn't matter because this one actually is in the platform layer and cannot be dynamically reloaded. And it's possible that maybe we never really need to fight that because it may be that we always actually have a pointer we can use. So maybe even now that I'm thinking about it more, maybe we don't even care literally at all. So yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to think that through. So what we would do in the case where if we want to make it so that we're not going to pass any kind of debug ID here, right, at all, in that case, all we would do is we would just use this string, I think, and we would snap an ID for that string. Like we'd actually hash that string and remember the ID of it. That seems like the smartest thing to do. All right, so back to the task at hand. Here we are in our debug value thing. We're going to be outputting this global pause inside this platform controls bit here. And like I said, what we want to do is start to make this when we're outputting those debug blocks, we want to start making this have the overall structure of the stuff that was doing this get group for hierarchical name, right? That was doing this sort of stuff. Now, the problem with this stuff is that this was made for building things that are stationary. And I don't know that we necessarily want that specifically, but I think, for the most part, we probably do. Meaning there are certain circumstances where maybe we want data that would be there on some frames and not be there on other frames. Maybe we would just gray that out, but I think we probably want to create the hierarchical structure permanently anyway, as if it was going through this thing. And so I think, that's just my assumption, but I think what we do want to do is just take this hierarchical stuff here, and I think we want to just bring it up above and actually use it specifically for the outputting of the debug blocks. That's what I think we actually want to do. So let's give that a try. Let's see where those debug block things were happening. Right here is our, let's see here, debug block. Let's see here. So here's where our debug block stuff is happening. So I'm gonna let me just put that in, drop that in here for now, and we'll get rid of handmade config because that doesn't happen anymore. What is this right here? And interact. Okay, we don't care about that. So when we create one of these blocks, right, we sort of see these blocks come in as we go. And I guess what we want to do as we see a block come in, and we want to sort of put that into the place where it was existing before. So I want to sort of add, let me see here, where is it? I want add element to group. I think this is what we're talking about here, right? So here you can see it looking up to see this get element from event. You can see what's going on, and then it will sort of push the thing in. It'll sort of push it on the stack and use it. So this get element from event is the thing that does the collation. You can see it happening here. And so what I want to do is I want that to happen, I guess, for everything that we might be doing. Now, it's not immediately clear to me when we actually do the debug block stuff, because here is the begin block, end block stuff, right? When we do begin block and end block, when we come through here, I don't actually know. Oh, sorry, data block is the one we actually care about. I don't actually know, since anytime we come through here, we've already gotten a debug element, which means it already should have taken its name and done, and done this to it. So I feel like that should have meant, unless I'm missing something, that we should have actually had those things hierarchically placed properly with the underscores parsed out of them. But it doesn't seem like that's what actually happened. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like I'm missing something about how we were doing what we were doing, because it just feels like, something's a little out of place. Maybe I'm forgetting, but my recollection was that, like, so for example, platform underscore controls, right? Platform underscore controls would have been parsed into platform and then controls underneath it. And I guess that's not what actually, how it actually works. I guess it did parse out the platform part. So now that I think about it, it is doing the first part of that parsing. And I guess what happens is when it gets to a debug block, it doesn't print the element name, it prints the debug block name. That might be the case. But let's see. So let's actually find out. So it looks like it's actually already doing what I wanted it to do for the most part. And so let's take a look at what's actually going on there. Because I think this is actually in pretty good shape. And like I said, this is mostly archaeology because I think we have most of the code we actually need. We just have to remember how it works and then sort of tweak it around a little bit. So if that's the case, inside here where we do the open data block, close data block, when we're running through here, the events that we get are presumably going to be debug value events, right? Because inside the interface code, if you remember the stuff we were just looking at, this debug value set event data, so what actually happens here is we call record debug event with debug type unknown, and then we call debug value set event, and that sets the type to whatever the thing was going to be, whatever the actual thing we wanted to record was. And so if we come through here, that's going to fall into this case here, which puts things inside these data blocks, right? And it calls, this storage element has been called. So in theory, that parsing should have occurred, right? So I want to just take a look. I think the easiest way for me to understand what I was doing at that time is just to look in the debugger for that, because I kind of want to see what happens there. So that's collate debug events. Because I want to understand a little bit better why the parsing isn't doing what I would have expected it to do. Of course, it helps if I actually set a breakpoint. Collate debug records. Better. So in here, I'm going to just start taking a look at some of these things as they come in, just so I know what's happening. Okay, so let's see. We've got a GUID. It's coming in from debug interface.h. Where's the file and line, or is that just what this is? I guess we don't actually know the file and line information of this, or do we? Debug event does not have one of those. Let's see here. And what is the element that it got? Let's see. It got a begin block. Two begin blocks. Oh, those are not the kind of blocks we want though. I'm going to skip right to here. So let's take a look at what the event is in this case. So the event in this place is the global pause, so that's good. This is the one I want to look at. And so this is going to store this guy. Let's see here. So there is a first data block, so it's going to go ahead and it's going to go ahead and use inside this data block. It's going to use the storage of that. It's going to put it underneath that data block which we opened, which is what we want, because that's the data block that's for the controls. So when we call store event, it looks like that just goes ahead and puts it in there, which is pretty straightforward. And yeah, nothing else to it. So that stores the data from the particular frame of that we have. And so I guess really at that point, it all came through get element from event, and that was it. So, and what does it do with the event information at that point? When it gets back the element, it actually stores that element, right? Yeah. Oh, okay, so no, it doesn't. Okay. So I guess that's a little confusing. I feel like this code, because it went through so many iterations, is sort of like unnecessarily obtuse, right? Because there's just a lot of stuff going on here that maybe doesn't necessarily need to. Now, the store event stuff makes sense because you can see that what we need is we need a way of recording information that never runs out of space. So the way that this works is it just goes, well, if I don't have room to store the value of this variable, that's not really a big deal. All I really have to do is overwrite some old thing. So that's totally fine, and that seems reasonable. So that store event thing makes sense. What doesn't super make sense is the element part, because the debug elements, I don't really understand exactly this part here, where like it gets stored underneath the block that it was in, which is fine, but that doesn't seem to, that wouldn't do sort of that parsing into the hierarchical stuff. So I guess we just count on the listing later to do that. I don't super understand though, because if we are calling get element from event here, doesn't that mean that we already gave this thing? Okay, I see. So we only parse out enough to make the parent. So we just look at whatever its immediate parent was, which I suppose makes sense, right? And then we would just say where we're going to put it in that group. Trying to decide whether I'm okay with that or not. Meh. 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 So then I assume most of what we're getting in terms of how things are printed out then actually has to do with when we sort of call this main menu situation, right? Because then we come into that, and we're doing sort of our walking here of these stacks, and we look to see what we've got in here, and we call debug draw element. And presumably, so what's happening is we're getting to here when we're going to draw this data block, and we loop through these things and we print them out, right? So that's presumably, whoa. So we actually loop through to find the oldest event every time. That seems like a bad idea. Debug type open data block. When we call debug draw element, we then look to see what the oldest one is. Yeah, that doesn't look super sustainable to me. I mean, I suppose it's fine if you cap the total number of frames that goes back, but you can see why this is kind of not particularly great. Because what's going to happen here is as we store more events, this will continue to get older and older. This will get longer and longer, that traversal. And you'll spend all your time sitting in these loops doing nothing. You know what I'm saying? And that's not particularly useful for anybody. So that seems like a really bad idea, to say the least. So I think we want to kind of clean this up, right? Yeah. So I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to clean up the way that we sort of manage these things and make something a little bit more clean for building that and also storing it, how we're thinking about storing it. So I feel like the store event stuff is probably where we want to start, and I feel like we want to clean that up a little bit. So when we're calling the store event stuff, I think that's going to stay, and I think this get element from event bit, that's going to not probably stay. Excuse me. So we'll see. But anyway, so when we're storing an event and we're storing it inside an element here, the element part is just for keeping things together with stuff that we care about. So this stuff here where we sort of look for things to free and then we store them, this part seems reasonable because it means we can take as many events as we want and just sort of store them, and we know that they'll just grow and grow and grow until we run out of space and we'll eat old frames. That seems like the right thing to do. What didn't seem so right to me is the fact that we seem to be, the way that we're storing multiple events of the same kind is by that linked list, and we don't have any real way of navigating that particularly well, right? So I'm not sure what the best thing to do here would be. It seems like maybe a better, this maybe is trying to be too clever, because this is not going to be able to kind of just jump around inside wherever that list is. Whereas if this was just a fixed size thing where we just said, oh, we're going to store the past 200 of these or the past 1,000 of these, it would have just been an array, right? And that makes it easier to do stuff like, say I want to, loop over them and talk about the, talk about the first one, the last one, the nth, go back to frame X and see it. So I am a little torn on that. I'm a little torn. I wonder if it wouldn't make more sense to just say, all right, in this case where we are going to store an event, maybe that event just gets inserted into a slot. And I feel like we played with this before and we tried to do this, but I think maybe, I don't know how smart that was of a decision, right? I feel like that may not have been such a good idea. Because we're kind of going to end up with a standing structure that just has all the stuff in it that we ever, that has like a sort of standing debug view sort of thing to it. And I feel like that we want that to have a known frame look back that you can just quickly access, right? And I just worry about, I worry about how to manage it if we don't. I like the fact that it can just sort of reclaim memory as it needs it, but I just worry that the linked list is going to be a problem there. You know what I mean? I mean, hopefully that it's relatively clear why that's a little troubling. And I know we played around with this a bunch before, and this is definitely the only, I would say, logical solution to to having it always reclaim. And I mean, another thing we could do is say we could just store a pointer to the most recent or a cursor that says here's where we're viewing, and that can move forward and backward or something. But I don't know. I really just don't know. You can't have all the things all the time, unfortunately. I wish you could, but of course you can't. And it even looks like here you can see that we were storing the most recent event, which is the one that we write. And in fact, I guess I don't know why when we output that open block, I'm not sure exactly why we even wanted to do it that way that we did it. Kind of curious. So we start at the oldest event. We go through, I guess it's because there's events in there. The events that are in there are like open data block, here are some values, close data block. I see. So really, the main change we need to make, just for starters, is that we should no longer be storing data blocks as data blocks. Probably what we actually wanted to do is make that be part of a standing structure. Now I can see why we didn't do that. We didn't do that because we wanted to be able to output like if we had multiple entities selected, we maybe wanted to output multiple entities. But I think the UI for that still probably wants to be constructed as a standing set, that can be looked into. And then you would just have like a next and previous on it or something like that where you could move through it. But I don't think you would so much want to have it like this where it's a stream that has to kind of be parsed, right? Yeah. I think that's what makes the most sense to me. So what I would say is open data block as a debug type, And I'm interested to know, too, about the debug types here. So here they are, right? Open data block as a debug type is really not something that I think I want to store in this way, that this is stuff that we actually print out, right? So when we come through these debug elements, and we're taking a look at these, I don't really know why we're checking the oldest element here, by the way, but apparently we are. You'd think we'd check the most recent one, wouldn't you? That seems like the most logical. But anyway. So checking the oldest element, like when we switch on this, and so depending on what it actually is that we're outputting there. Oh, this could be kind of cool. All right, so I'm sorry it takes so long, but parsing all this back into my head and deciding what to do with it takes a little bit of time. So I think this is you know, we were maybe a little misguided when we were doing it before, because again we were sort of trying things. We didn't necessarily know exactly what we wanted to have happen. So I think in this particular case, we sort of have a situation where maybe we were trying to do a little bit too much in this place and not really maybe thinking through what would be a good sweet spot. So what we were doing here when we got an open data block, closed data block pair, and we streamed stuff into it, is we just kind of stuffed all that into a big old stream. And if we had multiple data blocks that came through with the same ID, they all just kind of got stuffed on there as a stream. And I think we don't really want that to happen. I think what we would rather have happen is just treat that as multiple frames, basically, only they're not actually multiple frames, right? So I think what we want to do is still consider values to have, you know, ranges. And if we need to special case the fact that some values occur more often than others, you know, maybe occur several times a frame, maybe treat that as like a sort of a separate thing. So I want to just, I feel like that's, you know, maybe how we want to approach this. And so that this, when we're doing, you know, this stuff here where we're printing things out, I think what we would want to do is make it so that that this stuff is not really stored this way and doesn't, you know, doesn't work quite like this. Now, what I don't know, it looks like the way this was working is it just says like, okay, I want to scan forwards to find the last open block, and then I'm going to just print out one block's worth of data. I think what I'm trying to say here is this should no longer really be something that happens compartmentalized that way, I don't think. I don't know that we really want that to happen, right? Because as long as that happens, then we won't be going through the central system for parsing or any of that stuff. And furthermore, like as data, if data isn't present on a particular block, the block will like, the debug display would like jump in size and do weird stuff like this, where I'm not really sure that's how we want it to work. I mean, maybe we do, but that just seems a little bit not what we maybe would want. It's hard to say. I'm spending extra time thinking about this because I'm assuming that we were smart in the past, right? And I don't want to necessarily dismiss what we did. So I'm trying to think of maybe other arguments for why we might want to keep it this way. So yeah. So since this is calling debug draw event, by the way, when we kind of look in here and we do this default, if we didn't want the close block, I mean, so now I'm just trying to pick up like little things, and I'm just going to like do a little playing around with it so I can see what I actually think. So, you know, this end data block, I obviously would never want to print that out. So presumably if we didn't want to print that out, oops, Casey and his doesn't really know how to do modal editing very well. We have 15 minutes left on the clock, by the way, so I'm not going to stop quite yet. So in here, if we were to say we had an open data block, or here, where we say we have a closed data block, then I believe that would be sufficient for me to do essentially what I wanted to do, which was to prevent those from getting printed out maybe in the same ways that were happening before. So for example, for open data block, I could do this, right? Excuse me. I could do this. I think four-coder's indentation is very unhappy right now. So I could do this, and I don't really know. I guess I don't really want it to do debug event to text, to be honest. Although I guess debug var to text, maybe I do sort of want to do that. Here's the code for placing this interaction, and this would be essentially a collapse expand kind of interaction, I guess. So we'll kind of leave that for now. What I don't know is when we do sort of our when we do our indentation, I feel like our layout struct knows how to do indentation, which means that we could easily make our data blocks be indented as well, right? Because I think, so if we do open data block here, or, well, I guess debug draw main menu should have that in it. So when we do our stack depth stuff, you can kind of see here that we should have a thing that allows us to sort of indent or not indent. And so where do we draw our children? Oh, this is an in-order loop, so this isn't even recursive. So we don't recurse, we just kind of call straight through, so that's kind of crazy. But anyway, when we come through here, there should be a way for us to draw our children indented or not indented. So when we do, let's see, when we do depth, I guess it's just this. That's it, right? So the layout depth gets incremented or decremented. So if we wanted to, we can push these people sort of in and out as we go through. So for example, in here we could say that like everyone who's underneath this guy gets incremented. And everyone who's underneath this guy, the opposite is true. So, yeah. So that is more what we want, right? That allows us to put things underneath in the indentation area where we wanted, and presumably that works regardless of the situation. So yeah, that's all good there. And what we would expect. So I think mostly the question I have then is just, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe, I just don't know, maybe my concern isn't that warranted, but well, let's just keep going with this for now. So if I wanted to do that and I wanted to make this collapsible, then I would need a way to get a debug view for this thing, right? I would need a way to find out sort of like, yeah, when we do debug draw element, you can see that we do this thing getter or create debug view for whatever the thing is that we're printing out. And when we do a data block, we don't ever actually do any of that stuff for any of these guys inside debug draw event. And I'm not really sure why we decided to do it in a two-tiered way that way. But either way, oh, I guess we do a view here as well. So since we have a view for open data block, I assume that just means that we could, if we wanted to, do the exact same sort of expand and collapse behavior as we were doing for the other stuff, right? So inside debug draw main menu, where we have the ability to sort of do this toggle interaction, in theory, we could just make that also happen for open data blocks, which seems like what we want. So if we wanted to do that for open data blocks, we would need to do sort of the default interaction stuff, right? We would need to have whatever the item interaction for that was going to be. And I guess in this case, we do an event interaction that's an auto-modify variable. We don't actually want that to be the case for open data block. What we want to do instead is say that the item interaction for this is going to be a toggle expansion. And so what I also don't know is when we do get or create a debug view for, oops, that's no good. Get or create debug view for, I don't know how it knows what kind of debug view information it's going to actually store. I'm assuming, let's go ahead and, do I not have that bound? I guess I don't. Very confused right now. Is it that? No. Is it that? No. Huh. That's weird, because X is supposed to do something that it's not doing. I wonder if my for-coder config is busted. It might be. I'm going to take a quick look. So, if I look for corresponding. So KC find corresponding file. And KC open file or window. Yeah, so that's not what that's supposed to be. That's supposed to be find corresponding file other window. And so I have to fix that. All right, well, that's a to-do. Anyway, so what I wanted to find out here, and so I guess what I'll do is I'll switch to this again, handmade debug.h manually. What I'm not sure about is in debug view, like which one it is going to be, inline block or collapsible. To be honest, I'm not sure we don't want to just fatten this up and put all that stuff in there because why not? But who knows? So anyway, either way, we would have that collapsible, and so we could just make it so that whether or not we show what's under the collapsible is actually just used by the system, right? So I could make it so that when we do that, let's see, so we got bitmap ID, closed data block, open data block. So when we do open data block, when we do that printout, we could make it expand or collapse based on that. Now, the problem is we actually want to do it here, to be honest. So really, I suppose the proper place to do this stuff is to say you wouldn't ever really do this. You would probably just do it out here. When you know you've got an open data block, before you draw any of these events, you do this stuff. You know what I'm saying? And the layout depth increment decrement stuff, same way. So in here, where we do open data block, we print this out. Before we're going to do any of these guys, let's see here. We are, I guess, really brutalizing for-coder's indenter. It is not happy right now. So inside here, right, I guess the item interaction has not been created yet. So I would create that interaction myself, right? Because it's getting created up here, one of these guys. So yeah, I'm going to create whatever the interaction is that I wanted this guy to have. And that's the toggle. I'm going to go through here and do the printout and all that stuff. And then what I want to do is, if it's not collapsed, then I would do this stuff. But if it is collapsed, then I'm not going to do any of that at all. We're not going to look through any of its events or print out any of its stuff. That seems fair, right? So in this case, do we ever get a view for these guys? We do. So I can look to see if the views, the collapsible part of the view is going to be expanded always, I guess. Not really sure. It's a good question. And then what's the ID? It's just debug ID here, I guess. And let's see. So we got debug ID. We have some event that we're going to use here. So debug event to text, the event that we actually want is the one that we were going to draw. So it's the last open block is the actual one. So I believe it's last open block is the one we wanted to actually make. Store debug event. Is that so? Oops. So yes, that's true. I agree with you, Mr. Compiler. It's actually the last open block event. Although it's pointer. We then have debug text out at connect for argument 3, and I agree with that as well. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Well, that's actually v2, so it's actually the item. Wait, what? Oh, we're looking at item colors under code identifier. Okay. Well, I don't really know what the item color should be, to be honest with you. I guess we want to do the same stuff here. I'm not sure. That's a good question. So I want to know whether or not this item color is hot or not, and then do what it's going to do. View is undeclared identifier. That's because it accidentally got lowercase for some reason. There we go. So in theory, yeah. So actually, this thing is kind of handy. I like how this is working. I think there's just a little bit too much code in there. We probably need a little bit more utility functions because it's just a lot of cut and paste that has to happen there. But otherwise, that actually works relatively well. So that's kind of nice, actually. And similarly, I guess now that I think about it, so we also know that the reason that we can't edit these is just, I guess we would actually have been able to edit those values if we had ways of editing integers, which we don't yet. All right, so maybe there's really not that much stuff to actually do in the debug system. Maybe we just need to clean up some of this code, and maybe it's actually OK. Because that actually just does what we want pretty much straight away. Right? I mean, it pretty much does what I wanted it to do. And so we just need to make some interactions for these guys, and then we'd be done. Also, the way this is being printed out is dumb. And I don't know why it's being printed out that way, but I don't want it to be printed out that way. So I think we would also want to make a thing over here that would chop off that, would find the last underscore there. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. Yeah. Not 100% certain how I would want to do that. I mean, the most trivial way to do it, I suppose, is to say, you know, when we take the event name, there's a thing that's like in our ridiculous set of flags that we have here. We could do a thing which just goes ahead and truncates. So in add name, which is this, for example, we could just scan for the last underscore. So, you know, we could totally cheese this if we wanted to and say zbug var to text start at last underscore or something like that. And then we could just say, oh, well, all right. That name value is actually not what we're going to use directly. We're just going to say that while or for star scan equals use name star scan and then what we'll do is say that usename equals scan if it equals an underscore. And also, I suppose, and it's not a trailing underscore. So if it equals an underscore and you know, the thing after it is not equal to 0. So it has to not be the last character in the string. Then we'll allow it to use that as the name. So in that event, it will update the name. And then we should be able to pass that and have that work. Open block, let's see. Where are we? Where are we, people? That was in debug draw event. There we go. So when I pass these things, just pass that. I don't know why pretty bools and stuff is in there, because obviously that doesn't need to happen. We cut and pasted that, but doesn't actually need to occur at all. But that's all we really need, and then we just have to add it to our list of folks that you can do here. So like start at last underscore is now a thing. And that, I think, would make it so that we would actually have everything but the interaction. Yeah. Well, still prints that. So that was right. But it's actually got a value on there. I guess I'm telling it to print out a value, and its value is just its name. So I'm not sure how to actually say don't print the value. That looks like we didn't actually have one of those, which that would be nice as well. So in here, this part, this should be if flags and include or add value. Right? Because there should, if you have add name, you should also specify add value. I feel like that's kind of how that should go. I mean, I could preserve the current way of working by making it so that it was don't add value and do a not, but that doesn't seem like a very good idea. So I'm going to just look for everywhere we use debug var to text at the moment. And I'm just going to add the value part to it. That's the one where we don't actually want it. And that's it. All right. All right. So that seems reasonable. And that would allow us to output all of our control variables now. So for example, inside handmade.cpp, if we wanted to, you know, at the top of this thing, we could just go ahead and put all that stuff in there. And so, you know, I don't know, something like where we do this, we can just put in everything from here. Can just be added. And so this would just be begin or debug begin data block. And then these would just be debug value. Oops. And we can make these a little bit more We can make these a little bit more organized too if we want to, but we don't have to at the moment anyway. So I think inside begin data block, I guess the ID here is going to be exactly the same sort of trick that we did before. But like I said, since it's got the live code editing stuff, and we're going to have to start thinking about that a little bit more carefully, when we actually do this, this is just going to be, I guess, like, I don't know, just game for now. Debug pointer ID, as long as it points into something in our memory, that's fine. So what we can do here, for example, is we could just use the root pointer for the memory, for our game memory, would be fine, because we know that's always stable. So if I come through here now, I should see those values show up in here, if that makes sense. So there you go. Yeah. Oh, so interesting. So it actually is still creating, just like remember I was just asking, does it still create that hierarchy? And the answer is yes, it totally does still create that hierarchy, right? So this will be good. This is what we'll do tomorrow, is kind of finish that unification. So you can kind of see what happens, right? Where I was saying, like, it looks like it still creates hierarchy. It does still create the hierarchy when it parses these names. And I don't think we want it doing that for stuff that's inside a data block, right? So we'll see. We'll think about that a little bit more. But based on how this works, I'm not sure. Maybe we want to just leave the data block stuff. Maybe we don't want the hierarchy parsing stuff to ever actually do any hierarchical parsing unless it's actually parsing the name of a data block. And then the data blocks are hierarchical and everything else isn't. Does that make sense? So yeah. So now I think we're okay. Like we're actually closer than I thought we were in terms of stuff we might want in here. So that's not so bad. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the Q&A now that I'm relatively satisfied with that. Hotspur. The per frame arena space remaining debug counter is always going down. Is this okay? Yes, that is by design. So basically that's the amount of memory that was reserved for debugging. And it will just count down to 0. And then when it gets down to 0, it will just start recycling that memory. So basically what you want to do is you want to see it go all the way down to 0, and then it will stop. Gary Johansson, you mentioned a book that introduces relational databases. I lost the link. It's Jim Gray is the guy that I was talking about. And his book is, I think, Transaction Processing. This is the one. FUCon, will you re-implement the profiler? I think the profiler is still there. Really, we just have to finish the navigation of it, because I'm pretty sure the profiler actually, if you just inserted one, would actually just show up. Maybe I shouldn't have closed the editor so prematurely. Meaning I think if you take a look at, is it in here? I think if you take a look at counter thread list and you go into handmade.cpp, I think if you were to somehow do this here, and I'm not sure. Well, I guess the answer is that's something we should do tomorrow, because I really don't want to spend too much time doing that now, but essentially all we have to do to get a profiler still is inside here, we just need to actually insert one of those counter those counter thread lists or counter function list things. We just need to insert them. And so what we should do is, and in fact, I'll just put that here for tomorrow. We should do that. Tomorrow is what we should do. Because, yeah, the profiler is still in there, and we just never insert it in our hierarchy anywhere. Casey, how do you implement easily the standard output without using the IOStream library? It depends what platform you're on. If you're on Windows, they are actually just file handle. There's just file handles you can get called get standard handles. It's I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but I think it's get standard handles. Yeah. Or handle, sorry. From the Win32 platform layer, you just call get standard handle, and if your process has been launched from the console, you'll get these handles back, and then you can just do file reads and writes directly to them to output the stuff that you want. Which do you prefer and why? Pound if def, pound if defined. I tend to prefer pound if to pound if def because I like to be able to pound define something. I like to be able to do a pound if def to mean, did anyone know about this value and set it? So the pound if def is really just to make sure that default values are set for stuff at the top of something, and then everywhere else it just uses a pound if on the value and assumes that it will have been set to 0 or 1 based on which one it should be, right? That's how I tend to do it. I never use pound if defined parentheses unless I have some more complex thing that has to happen. Dino27 1988, can you tell me the version you just said, but for Linux and now Windows? I'm on Arch. I'm pretty sure that on Linux you can't really not link with glib. Well, you can, but then you have to use syscalls. To be honest with you, I don't know how to get this directly out of Linux. I don't do much Linux programming. So let's see. I think you would need to know the syscall for the syscalls for reading and writing, and then you would need, yeah, I don't, and I don't even know if anyone ever wants you to do this anymore. But if you're trying to go around the C runtime library, you would need to implement it via syscalls. Where the handles come from, I'm not sure. The handles that initialize the standard I/O stuff, those handles have to come into your process somewhere, but I don't know where they come in. Maybe there's a syscall that gets them for you. There might be a syscall way to get like your process startup stuff. In terms of interaction with the debug settings, what do you have in mind for modifying the values, switches, or sliders? Yeah, probably just a switch. I want to just at least be able to like click on the value for the booleans and then like drag a value to like change it if it's a floating point or something. True Blue, what does a for each loop do? A for each loop is not a C thing. So there's no such thing as a for each loop in C, obviously, because C only had regular for loops. But in other languages besides C, what a for each loop is it's a shorthand notation of saying that you want to do a loop as many times as there are elements in something you're going to pass it. So for example, if you passed it a linked list data structure, or a hash table data structure, or some data structure that presumably the language understands, and you do a for each, then what it's going to do is it's going to go figure out how many things there are in it, and then do that many iterations, giving you one element every time. It's a handy thing because it's basically just, it's a lot of times when you do a for loop, you're just trying to iterate over all the members in something. And C++ I don't think ever actually added good ways to do that, for whatever reason. So, but maybe there is in like C++, 2025 or whatever. Let's see. Not related to today's topic, when do you think you'll be designing your game instead of writing the engine? Well, honestly, never. Like, the whole point of this is that I'm not a game designer, so we'll be implementing game features fairly soon. Like I said, there's not that much stuff left to do. But we won't be doing any design. Like, we're just implementing a fixed thing that I have written down. It's like, this is what we're going to implement. And so this is not a design stream and never will be. There's not going to be any discussion of design. There's not going to be any talking about design. There's not going to be any game design happening on stream. There's just going to be, here's the thing we need to like implement specific game thing. This guy has to hit this other thing, and we'll do that. So we will be doing a bunch of that code, but there's no game design. I'm not a game designer, and I don't want to talk about game design because I don't have anything to say. What language do you think is best for programming games? C at the moment. I'm not happy to say that the best language for programming games is a language that's like 40 years old, or 30 years old. 30 years old? It's 30 or 40 years old. I don't know how old it is now. I don't want to do the math, but it's very, very old. But most new languages are just really bad, for games anyway. I think most languages are actually just really bad in general. So I don't really know of a better language than C for programming games. But I wish there was a better one. And maybe if John's new language works out, maybe that'll be it. Because it certainly focuses on making a language that's like C, but has a bunch of more powerful features on top of it that can do all the things that C can't do well, Sean McGrath. Oh my God, C is 44 years old? God. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll get a new language for games sometime soon. But I don't know. It's been 44 years and we haven't gotten one, so I don't know. Easy side. The handles are just int IDs numbered from 0, which map to per process after you table process. Okay, so you're saying that in Linux, when you start up, the handle IDs are guaranteed to be numbered that way, so that you know that you can just use the, like 1 or something always maps to standard error or something like that? Dino27, I cannot consider using John's language yet because he has not released it yet, as far as I know. Until he actually puts it out as like, here is a thing to start using, obviously I can't really use it. So I'm going to go ahead and close down because we're a little over time here. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade here. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along at home with the code, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code, so you can play around with it and learn from it and conduct your own experiments. We also have a forum site you can go to ask questions, a Patreon page you can use to support this video series, a tweet bot you can use to find out the schedule, and if you want to type 4Coder into your search box, you can find the editor that we use on Handmade Hero now, which was written by someone on the stream, in fact, Alan Webster. And you can pledge to that and get your very own copy of 4Coder. And the custom config that I wrote for 4Coder is also always available now. It's in the Handmade MIS directory, so if you pre-ordered the game, you will get that. That will just be in there for you. That's about it. I'll be back here tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Hope to see you there, and maybe we'll get some of our debug values. We'll implement some editing for those, and we already actually have editing in there. So really, all I think we have to do is just enable editing for those, and then we're good to go. So that's it for today. Hope to see you guys tomorrow. Until then, take it easy, and I'll see you guys on the internet.